Welcome to More Than a Conversation, the podcast where we meet and have discussions with some of the most interesting people and innovative leaders in their fields from all walks of life. We will be discussing everything from politics to theology to religion to philosophy to life. Every once in a while, I may just be on here talking about whatever's in the news and whatever I think will be of interest to you. This is your host, Patrick Connolly, and I hope that today will be more than a conversation for you. Welcome to More Than a Conversation. This is your host, Patrick Connolly, and today I am joined by someone who I have seen their work. I've read some of the things they've written. I've seen some of their videos, and I'm excited to have them on because I believe you guys are going to love hearing from them based on some of the conversations that have happened in the past on More Than a Conversation, and an understanding really of what the needs are for us as people, both believers and non-believers, to be able to understand some of the issues that we're going to deal with today. But without further ado, let me welcome to the podcast, Monique Duson. Monique, I'm so glad to have you on today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Monique, now I was connected to you, I think we've not met, but the first time I saw your work, I want to say you were at a conference that Southern Evangelical Seminary put on. Does that ring a bell? Does that make sense?
Yes. I love my friends over at SES, Adam Tucker and their entire crew. So I give them a shout out. It might have been the conference last year with Eric Muldrow from Code Red Conversations and Bob Woodson. And I'm blanking on the name of the actual conference. But it was with Eric Muldrow. And if you're not following his work, I definitely say check out Code Red Conversations and the Woodson Center with Bob Woodson.
Absolutely. Bob Woodson is someone we haven't talked with yet. Eric Muldrow has been on the show, so he's a friend of the More Than a Conversation family, and
awesome.
he's doing great stuff. He's a voice that needs to be heard. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Right now, you have the Center for Biblical Unity, and you're doing a lot of work. Your voice is being amplified, and I think that's indicative not only of hard work that you're doing, not only of your skill and your talent as a creative, as a collaborator, as a person who's educating, but also there is a need for the things that you talk about. And so as your profile grows, we like to do this little segment on More Than a Conversation where we kind of go back and do the equivalent of the Marvel origin story. And so I want to go back and find out, before you were doing what you're doing now, tell us a little bit about you. You know, even you can share details like where you're from, how you got started on this journey and that sort of thing. So tell us a little bit about you.
Yes. Well, first, I have to say that the Center for Biblical Unity is not just me. It is actually me and my ministry partner, Krista Bontrager, and you can check her out at theologymom.com. Without Krista, there would be no Center for Biblical Unity. So now that that's said, let me go back a little bit and tell you my story, a bit about my backstory. So I was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles, California, and spent the first 16 years of my life there. Then moved up to a suburb of LA and was there until I moved to South Africa in 2014. Now, I grew up in LA at like the height of, like the hip hop movement, and you had things like Tupac playing and Will Smith's Summertime was on the radio. Like I just grew up to me at a time in LA that was amazing. But it was also violent. There was like gang wars and drugs and things like that in South LA. We also, at the time, LA became known for the Los Angeles riots in 91, 92. And so those riots centered around Latasha Harlins being killed by a Korean store owner and the Rodney King beating. And so at that time in LA, it was extremely volatile, white and black issues and Korean and Black issues. There were some Hispanic and Black issues going on, but primarily I would say Korean and Black and white and Black. And as those issues surfaced, as I listened to stories from, you know, my parents and my friends' parents, teachers, the conversation was largely around why white people think that they can do Black people any kind of way, how white people are racist, how as a Black person, I should be proud to be Black. And I also have to be aware of what it means to be Black in America. And so I grew up where the word on the street was a lot of race talk. And if you were to follow that trail today, that conversation would probably fall more in lines with a critical race theory type of conversation. Was it all critical race theory? No, but some of those ideologies or tenets from the ideology were definitely present.
When you're growing up in LA, how old were you when you moved out of LA?
About 15 and a half.
Okay,
somewhere between 15, 16. But yeah, I definitely know that I was in the suburb at 16.
Gotcha. So do you, at that point, you would very much be a person who identified with that South LA feeling, though, at that point.
Yes.
So what was it like, first of all, when you moved out to the suburbs? Was that was that a decision that was made to get the family out of that setting, or what led to going to the suburbs?
Yes. So I was just in a really violent area in LA. And gosh, we had planned to move, my mom had planned to move us out of the gang area, the drugs and all of that, up to North Hollywood, which was still a lower socioeconomic area. It just wasn't the heart of South Central. And so we moved like 2 days after the riots started. I remember like moving and buildings still like having smoke come out of them. So the decision was really just to get us into a different atmosphere so that we weren't constantly surrounded by violence.
And so you guys move out of there, you see this world happening. Do you remember as a teenager, do you remember what you were thinking was the cause of this? Are you even thinking about that? But as a teenager, did you already have a view of race and its connection to these things?
Yes. Looking at the riots, it was just the anger of Black people, it was our frustration. It was the pent up emotion of being frustrated or just being done with racism, being done with the violence against Black people, or as what you would hear today, Black bodies and things like that. And so I had already had a lot of this thought process in my mind, just from teachers, like I said, or from, family members and things like that. But when Reginald Denny happened, and none of the, officers went to jail, it was really solidified. And so, I'm sorry, not Reginald Denny, the Rodney King, when Rodney King's, because Reginald Denny was the man who was beaten on Florence and Normandy during that riot. But Rodney King was the guy, he was pulled over, in case anyone is not familiar with the story, he was pulled over north of LA, off of a freeway, and he was severely beaten, and it was caught on video. It was like one of the very, very first police video beatings, or any kind of videotaped mishap done by the police. And so this was everywhere. It was on every TV station. And when the verdict came down that they weren't guilty, one was acquitted, or there was no verdict actually found for one, LA just erupted. It erupted. I remember like police officers driving back with like blood on their faces. LA was a mess. And so at the time I saw the justification because it was like, well, people are tired. Now, I wasn't a Christian. I wasn't, professing to know Jesus or anything like that. But I do remember as a teenager just thinking, well, this is what happens when people, get tired of just being beaten or, treated poorly and things like that.
I want to have that understanding of how that worldview is developing and what your worldview is in that moment. And I don't even want to really at this point color it with even the gospel or even what the correct view might be. I really want to get into that idea of your view at that moment. So that's the cause for those questions. And so you move out of the city. Let me ask you this. So while you're in the city, and this is a situation that I think, most of us the biggest connection we would ever have to South Central LA when we're over here on on the East Coast. I mean, maybe movies would be our closest connection.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, Don't Be a Menace. That might be,
Boys in the Hood, Friday.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would be our connection, these movies. And so we grew up with a glorified view of what that was like. A view that had an understanding that there was, this life that was almost romanticized, I would say, and never seeing the tragedy of it. So you move out at that point. You understand what it is to have the fear, the disruption, those things from being in a violent area. You get out of the city, and then how long are you in the suburbs?
I was there from about 16, so I would say 20 years.
Oh, you were there for a long time before South Africa
Mm-hmm.
then. Gotcha.
Yeah. Then I moved to South Africa in 2014.
So what took you to South Africa?
Gosh, I was invited to go back in 2010 as part of a leadership development organization. And I went every year from 2014. I went twice in 2010. And then I went every year until 2013. In 2013, I just felt the Lord telling me, hey, now is the time to move here. And I went and I worked with kids who were impacted by trauma, who lived in their own, version of a South Central. It was called the Cape Flats. And it was just a ton of violence, drugs, anything and everything, imaginable would happen in this area. And these kids were experiencing this firsthand. And so I worked with kids, families, teachers to, number one, help kids be able to learn. There's a lot of things that happen to the brain when trauma is introduced. And one of the issues that can pop up with traumatized children is that it impacts their ability to learn. Mm-hmm. So it can impact reading, cognitive skills, and things like that. And so I worked with kids to help them overcome some of those issues.
And then trauma, there's so much good work that's been done regarding trauma and understanding, even just the way like the frontal lobe shuts down and learning is inhibited and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Now, so when you're there, so you grow up in an area that is ravaged by a lot of issues. You go out to the suburbs, and as you already pointed out, we're not painting it as the best experience ever or the upper class. You didn't move out to Malibu. You moved out.
I wasn't in Malibu. I wasn't in Beverly Hills, Toluca Lake. I was in North Hollywood, and for all it's worth, yes, it was a lower socioeconomic area, but it was a heck of a lot better than, the bullets that would be ringing out at night or the prostitutes walking by your house or things like that. So yes, it was still a lower socioeconomic area. Yes, my family still struggled, and it was so much better than where I came from.
Yeah. Well, there's a certain level of just the anxiety having to go down because you're not just thinking about survival. You're not thinking about violence, not thinking about those things. But so you move out and then you end up going back and working in South Africa. And here you are again. I'm assuming when you say the Cape Flats, somewhere near Cape Town, I'm
yes.
assuming that.
Yeah.
So here you are in this area and you're seeing kind of the same thing again. You're seeing people that, for lack of a better way to put it, people that look like I look, if I'm you, people who are my skin color, people who have much of the same story that I have. South Africa has a much more recent history with some more blatant things systematically than we do. And so there you are working. Whose fault is this situation in your mind? What is the cause? Go ahead.
White people. It was white people's fault, because of South Africa's own segregation and different areas, acts that had been passed, and why certain people had to live in certain groups or in certain communities, and what that meant for schooling and education, and who had money to be able to afford school. even the government schools requested or required fees to be paid. And so when you look at a government school in the Cape Flats area versus a government school in Stellenbosch, it should be, to me, like the same school, because they're requiring fees, but the people in the Cape Flats can't pay those fees. So there's no books. There's, 50 kids in a classroom. There are kids who don't have uniforms, or uniforms are too small, or the kids come to school hungry, or, I had fourth graders selling guns in our school. There was a ton of issues. And yet I can drive, down the road into Stellenbosch, a government school still, I think it's called a Model C school. And because the parents can pay those fees, and then they also can pay additional fees, or they provide additional resources, well, that government-run school is, flourishing. They have all of these different sports and swimming, and, it runs the gamut. And then you can go across the street from the Model C school and go to like Paul Ruiz, which would be a private school, and see even more, grander and things like that. And so it was always a conversation of, this is the fault of white people. This is what happens when white people become in charge. This is what happens when there is the evil of racism. And to a degree, yes, it is part of the evil of racism, but it's also part of the issue or condition of the human heart, and what happens when wicked people, come into power and things like that.
At that point, are you a believer?
I am. Yes. So when I moved to the suburbs, when I moved to North Hollywood, I ended up being invited to go to church with a friend from high school. And that's where I started my journey with the Lord, and, being in the Word and praying and, all of that.
What kind of church? And when I say what kind, I'm not necessarily concerned about denomination, but would it be an evangelical church? Was it a high church? Like, what type of church was it?
Assembly of God. And so
Okay.
it leaned more Pentecostal, charismatic. I had gone to church a few times with my grandmother. When I was younger, she would take me, quite often, but that stopped probably when I was about 8 or 9. And then I didn't go back to church truly, like maybe on a holiday or something like that. But when I was about 16.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
I'm a Church of God pastor, so very familiar when you say Assembly of God. So you're at this church now. What was the racial demographic of the church? What did that look like?
Well, it started off all white. It started off when I came, I'd say, probably 98% white. It was a more affluent church. So the area that I lived in North Hollywood was actually a more affluent area at one time. But then a lot of the money moved out, lower socioeconomic families moved in, but this church was still standing in the community, and people would drive in. And so you had a lot of older people, a lot of older money still coming into the church. Now, the youth group, they had a new youth pastor who eventually became the senior pastor, which changed a lot of the demographic of the church overall. But he really had a heart for outreach to schools, to young people. And so he was bringing in a lot of kids, 200 kids from, local schools. And that then began to change the demographic of the church. I remember people not liking it, wondering who these kids were. We were rowdy. We didn't really match the color of the church, which was white. I remember having people walk by me and clutch their purse and, huddle together in the church. And so that is kind of where we started. But I'm thankful that our youth pastor, who then became the senior pastor, he persevered and he pushed through a lot of that. It was, it can be rough to change the music when you're used to only doing the slow hymns. And now you have 200 youth who are from a hip hop culture and are wanting to listen to Kirk Franklin and have music where they can clap and things like that. And so, church was an interesting experience when I first came into church and first came into my relationship with the Lord.
So your relationship with God is being developed at the same time as your worldview is continuing to develop. And as you get involved in these groups, you're working in the community. Now, were you doing the kind of work you did in South Africa? Were you doing that kind of work in the LA area as well?
Yes. So I studied sociology and I did it with the goal of doing social work. I had eventually thought that I would go and get my MSW, and the Lord has just completely changed that. But I've done everything from working in group homes and with foster kids to homeless case management to program management and everything in between. So yes, I've done a lot of work with homeless communities. I eventually at the same church went into children's ministry and oversaw our children's ministry program, which then led me to doing outreach with schools and things like that. So it's always been some type of work with lower socioeconomic individuals or families.
So here you are, you're doing this work, and it's interesting. You mentioned you're trained in sociology, which is in some ways, I don't want to generalize, but in some ways is a push towards groupthink and grouping of individuals. And so you're developing this view. You're in this church surrounded by white folks as the church is undergoing a demographic change. At that point, how is your faith interacting with that? I mean, and honestly, there's got to be some things that it's not just Monique is coming in with her views that are hers because she is Black and because she's from South Central LA and because she's blaming. There's also, let's be real, there's also the person in the church who clutched their purse when you walked by. Like there's those things as well. So how does that, like, how were you reconciling your feeling about your brothers and sisters with this idea that there's this divide between us?
You know, I think as a young person, and I kept this thought for a very long time. It was like, I love Jesus. Black people are cool and white people are racist. And that was it. Like, if I just summed it up in a nutshell, that's kind of how I participated. Now, did that mean that I didn't have white friends? No, there were people who were white that I dearly loved. And yet there was also this running narrative in my mind that they would never truly be able to understand racism, or that they participate in ways that may be racist even without their knowing. So to me, those two positions weren't in conflict. It was just the reality. Black people are cool, white people are racist, and they may not know it, but there's always I don't want to say proclivity, but there's always the opportunity. There's always the chance. I need to kind of be on guard. And I think that sums it up pretty well. Like, I love Jesus, and these two things also happen simultaneously.
And I asked that really in a lot of sincere good faith for myself, wanting to know, as a pastor, as our church is increasingly becoming more diverse, and that is something that I am steering into with everything that I possibly have, something that's close to my heart since I was a kid. That's just, I didn't really understand. In fact, I didn't understand that there was supposed to be an issue between like white people and Black people in particular until probably middle school, because I grew up in my neighborhood was a little more diverse. In fact, was probably a little more, in the area I grew up in, would have had more Black people in my particular neighborhood and within a mile of my house than most areas. And so I had no idea. And I got to like middle school, really, and it was like the first time that I encountered some of these things. And then I started opening my ears a little bit, and I was surprised and shocked and saddened looking back at things I heard in the church, outside of the church, and so on and so forth. And so one of the things that I recognize, and I guess my question, I'll ask you another question. You felt like they couldn't understand your view. I still don't think that I can understand what it is to walk through life as a Black person in America. I can listen to you, I can hear you, I can do all those things, but I still tend to believe that I can't really get my mind around it. Do you still think that people can't understand, that white people cannot understand what it is to be Black?
No, I actually don't. I don't think that every Black person's story is the same. So while some Black people may have experienced issues with racism, there are Black people too who have not. I don't subscribe to this idea that the entire Black experience is monolithic. Like it's the same for everyone. And so I don't know, like this is our first conversation. You might have experiences with racism that I wouldn't know about, but that doesn't mean that every white person has had an experience with racism, so it's one of those things where it's like, we have to be careful that we don't collapse, experience and individuals. And now we say, well, the experience has to go with the skin color. I don't actually believe that to be true. That, I, as a Black woman, may have had an experience with racism. Not every Black woman has. And so to say, well, I don't know what it's like to walk, the streets of America as a Black person. Well, I don't know what it's like for the person next to me who might be Black to walk the streets of America the same way. Like I feel like it's your own experience.
So it's really none of us knows what it is to walk through life as anyone else. Not as a group, but as any individual. And that's actually a very helpful way to think about that. And so I appreciate that. This is learning from me as well. I was struggling really to put that in perspective because I'm always trying to be considerate of that but at the same time, I think I'm doing something that a lot of people do, and that is reduce. Particularly, I guess we're predisposed to reducing things into groups, whatever it is, people into groups and categories. And so when we make you monolithic, well, that's not in fact, turning a group of people into a monolith is not the opposite of racism. It is racism. It is. Yeah. So, I
mean, this isn't the 50s, I'm not living in, segregated Alabama, segregated Birmingham in the 40s and 50s, where I might be able to say, okay, you know what? For this group of people, the experience is this. Like everyone needs to be cautious. It's like we're not in a sundown. I'm not in 1940 Birmingham in a sundowner town. A sundowner town is a town where Black people needed to be out by sundown. We're in 2022, America. Does that mean that racism doesn't occur? No, of course racism occurs. It's an issue of the heart. But today, I really don't think that grouping people and being like, well, this is the Black experience is, one, helpful. Two, I don't believe it's true.
Here we are. The sociologist is telling me don't put people in groups. So this is an enlightening day. And we would agree on that, we don't want to put people in groups. We don't want to do that. It's about the individual experience. But there was a point where this wasn't your thinking. So help me understand that. How did you go from being, well, first, before we go to the moment of awakening to the way that you're thinking right now, did your thought process how much did it become the way you engaged life? How much were your actions involved? Were you an activist? Were you involved in promoting a certain way of thinking regarding race? Or was that just the way you thought and you just kind of lived life but didn't engage it?
It was the way that I lived life. And I did everything from that position. So in working with kids, that was my reason to work with kids, because I knew that there would be a glass ceiling that white people wouldn't let Black people climb through. So how do you get educated? How do you beat some of these systems?
Hey, More Than a Conversation listeners, I hope that you are enjoying this conversation as much as I am, and I hope that you're getting something great out of it today. I'm just wanting to jump in here in the middle to take a moment and let you know a few ways that you can help out More Than a Conversation. First, wherever you're listening, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. That will definitely help, and that'll make sure that you get all the content. Also, if you have a way to rate, if your app allows you to give a 4-star, 5-star, whatever the rating is that's the top rating, I would so appreciate if you would go ahead and drop a rating there. That's how the aggregators and the distributors rank podcasts, and the higher the ranking you give, the more ears will be able to hear these great conversations. Thanks again, and I'm hoping that today has been more than a conversation for you. Now let's get back to it.
Going to South Africa, it was the same thing. Yes, I wanted to help them through traumatic experience and through poverty and things like that. But all of that was because of whiteness. All of that was because of white systems that I saw as continually keeping people down. I would say, like, was I an activist? Was I going to, I think I was in South Africa when BLM formed, but, I wasn't at BLM rallies. I wasn't marching or things like that. But I think what what is probably more dangerous than the person who goes to the BLM march once or twice a year is the person who lives from this mentality or this ideology as their mindset, as their reality every day, to either usurp systems, to grow and groom, disciple the next generation into this thinking. It's one thing to go to, a BLM rally and virtue signal, or, say, hey, I raised my fist, I've done good work. It's something completely different to live and breathe this and then groom and disciple another generation. And this is what we're seeing, I think, in a lot of universities, which is a completely different, question, a completely different topic. But when we see the grooming and the discipling of another generation into this mindset, that's what's really dangerous to me.
So you're living your life from this experience. You're doing what you feel is the best way to make an impact, which is you are enabling young children of color to make their way through the system that is rigged against them. Now, as you're doing this, are you telling them that this system is rigged against you? Is that a conversation that's happening?
It was just like we could have general conversation. It would depend on the child, depend on the age of the child. With one of the organizations that I worked with in South Africa, I think the ethos, just the normal day-to-day conversation between staff that could trickle over into conversations with kids and things like that, that was just normal. Again, so it wasn't, I need to go and intentionally target. I got to make sure I have 3 conversations with 3 Black kids about, whatever the ideology or tenet is, 3 conversations about racism being endemic. No, it was about reading Pedagogy of the Oppressed and then living from that reality. How do we live from that reality? How do I train someone else to live from that reality?
So you, I guess I'm assuming you're saying that Pedagogy of the Oppressed would not be the place to build our worldview from. No, that's interesting. We just recently I've been involved in some conversations regarding educators who are building their worldview from that view. It's interesting though, because like right now we're seeing a lot of work to do things like ban CRT and that sort of thing. But it sounds like what I'm hearing from you is an overt lesson is not really what has perpetuated this to this point. It's more just that understanding that everyone operates from. So that's a whole nother point that I think we need to deal with. And that again is another subject, but pushing back may not be banning some kind of curriculum, because I'm not even sure what that, honestly, I'm not really truly sure what that completely means. As much as it is, I don't know, educating to another from another perspective. So you're walking this out. As you're walking this out, you've got this view, you're passing it along. It sounds like to me, you're full on woke at this point would be the best way I know how to describe it. You've bought into this concept, and then something happened. Something changed, because when I heard you, that's not what you were saying. So how'd you make that turn?
I ended up moving home from South Africa, and I moved in with my ministry partner. And we just had a ton of conversations about race, justice, what is biblical justice? What does that look like as opposed to social justice, which I upheld? And, there was challenge on both sides. There were things that I would talk about and present, and she would be like, oh, okay. And then there were things that she would talk about and present, and I was like, no, that's racist. But then eventually I would come around and be like, okay, she had the word to back it up. And just after a ton of conversations, I found myself, kind of literally praying that the Lord would show her family, their participation in racism, their whiteness, their, all of these things, and why social justice is the way. And the Lord really impressed it upon my heart that I needed to repent. And that, social justice, one, I need to repent from racism. And from the ideology I was upholding, this huge social justice worldview or social justice ideology framework. And it was the word of God that really kind of broke these things down for me. What is a human person? What does it mean to be a human person? What did God speak over people from creation? And how does social justice align with that? Or does it completely miss it altogether? If it misses it altogether, then am I missing what God has intended for the human race? And so that was the beginning. It was the beginning. It was just a lot of conversations. My heart has always been for justice. And so it was really understanding what is God's idea of justice, or his thoughts about justice. If justice, circles his throne, and if he is a just God, then how do I participate with justice from his standpoint? And that had to be in 2019. And in 2020, we founded the Center for Biblical Unity.
And so that's a pretty volatile time. Lots happening in 19 and 20. I do want to ask about the terms, because terms get thrown around a lot. And we hear the term social justice. And I will see people who, they'll say, well, social justice is all through the Bible. It's all through the prophets, and that's the idea. So can you help us from your perspective? Can you define what you would call social justice? And then can you tell us whether that matches with biblical justice or what the difference might be?
Yeah. So social justice is the ideology, concept of being not just good, but it's the work of advancing the human, helping the human to live their best life, or to be secured from things like poverty, ailments, things like that. But it also includes things like equality. So social justice wants an equal footing for all people, not necessarily a bad endeavor. But we have to look in the word to see, well, how does the word look at things like equality? How does the word look at things like poverty? Social justice is very concerned with redistribution of wealth. It looks at the redefinition of marriage. It's looking at what helps the human person to flourish, to live. Very concerned with education and housing, food, like all of these things that would, to a degree, make us seem like we are doing good. The issue with, and it's social, so it's for all people. The problem is that it's a redefinition of justice, of biblical justice, where biblical justice really looks at how are things happening equally or fairly. So I'm not judging the rich better or worse than I'm judging the poor. I'm not going to, defer to the poor over the rich. I'm not going to defer to the Black over the white and things like that. Like, we hold these things very fairly. We find this concept, we find the concept of this in Leviticus, and then we find it again in James, where, in James, it says that we're not going to, treat one person better than the other. We're not going to treat the rich better than the poor. But then it also looks at how we treat one another. How do I treat the orphan? How do I treat the widow? How do I treat those who cannot do for themselves? One of the ways that I think we can really see God's standard for justice, again, like I said, is through Leviticus, but then also in the 10 Commandments. So the 10 Commandments gives us rules or regulations on how we treat God, and then it gives us rules and regulations on how we treat each other. What social justice seeks to do is they seek to put their own spin on what is good, true, and beautiful, where we find the definition of what is good, true, and beautiful in the scriptures. What I mean by that is social justice will say, well, it is good for us to redefine marriage. We want to be fair. We want to be equal and have equality. So our definition of good would be that we now promote LGBTQ plus or gay marriage and things like that. And that is at the height or in the same lane as a biblical definition of marriage. But in the scriptures, what we see is that the biblical definition of marriage is truly the only definition of marriage. So social justice, it's a redefinition of, or a redefining, a reimagining of justice. A lot of people throw out Micah 6, you have to do justice, you need to walk humbly with your God, love mercy. But it's such a misuse of the scripture. Many people who are quoting Micah 6:8 have never read Micah 6:1, nor have they read Micah 1:1 to understand what's happening in the story of Micah, and how would the people who originally would have heard these words have understood. The people who understood Micah 6 also understood the law of Moses.
Well, Micah 6:8 begins with do the right thing, essentially, do righteousness.
Well, there's that. Yeah. But again, if you don't understand what righteousness is, what it means to be a just or righteous person, as we find in the law of Moses, well, yes, it's easy in 2022 America to say, well, your Bible says, or the word of God says, Micah 6:8, you should do justice. Thus, we need welfare, marriage equality, abortion, and homeless shelters. That's not justice. Justice must look at the definition of a human person. So what does it mean to look at the creation mandate over the human person? What does it mean that we, marry and that we cleave man to woman? What does it mean that we work? There are things that social justice warriors, and I'm not, shaming them or, trying to demonize them, but the ideology I will demonize. I said, this is demonic. And I used to be one that would uphold this worldview. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have a proper understanding of what it means to be a human person. It's a very humanistic view of what it means to be human. It's an idea that, well, if we just change structures in society, of course humans will be better. It has no concept of the depravity of man.
Sure. Yeah, and there's the idea, Frank Turek's stealing from God. We're going to steal the concept of doing good from God, but we're going to abandon the morality of God that goes along with that. And so,
yes, no true definition of what it means to be good.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you for laying that out. I think a lot of times words get thrown around so much that they become words, and we fight about the words, and then we don't think about the meaning behind the words, and the words actually matter. And social justice is a word that a phrase that sounds so good. It sounds like something we want to be involved in, but we don't. We want to be involved in biblical justice, and there's a difference.
Yeah, so people get wrapped up because they have good hearts. They have hearts that are, created to do justice,
Sure.
But when we're not in the word, then it just all goes astray.
And I think that's an important thing for people to recognize as well. The majority of people that are listening to this podcast are going to be people that, there's probably some that freaked out right at the beginning when you said white people. They were probably like, oh my gosh, who's he got on here? Not realizing that your story included a change in thinking. But there's a lot of people, I think, that do demonize people and do demonize a lot. There's an old saying that show me I believe it's show me a young conservative and I'll show you someone with no heart. Show me an old liberal and I'll show you someone with no mind. And that's really an overstatement. But the idea is this is about people who have a heart. Mm-hmm. Typically, a lot of these people have a heart for what's right. And what we have to recognize as the church is that it was truth. It wasn't yelling. It wasn't a law even. It was truth shared to you from a sister in Christ that enlightens you. And that is what I think we need to recognize. We have people who are yearning for some sense of right or justice. Mm-hmm. They just don't know what it is they're yearning for. And I know that That's so difficult to say. And there's so many people that are probably like, what do you mean people were burning things down? I get it. They were wrong. They were completely wrong to do that.
Yeah.
At the core of that, there are people that have some sense that there's got to be a way that's better than this, because they look at things that are bad. And again, there's a lot of things that are called bad that aren't. There's a lot of things that are overstated, but they look and they see the obvious. Yes, there's racism. Yes, there's some things that have happened with police that are wrong, and they see that. Or let me not even say some things. Let me say a lot of things. There have been a lot of things, obviously, that have been wrong. And so they see that and they go, hey, there's got to be some better way. But they don't have any construct of what that better way is. So all they do is look and go, well, let me give you what I think you want, and we'll call that justice. And that's not justice.
Yes. And, to some degree, I believe that we all have that desire in us because we are created in God's image.
Yes.
So even this is why you can get a secular humanist who has no true concept of God, may not believe that God exists or things like that, but yet they still want to do justice because they are created in the image of God. But when we look at, the burning of buildings and things like that, we have to remember that people are sinful and wicked,
yes,
including us who,
sure,
want to judge and say, well, they're horrible and I can't believe that. No, we are all sinful, wicked people. And, we're thankful for Jesus. We're thankful to have the knowledge of the saving grace of Jesus. And there are people who don't have that. And so they, in their best efforts, want to do their own justice. They want to create their own version of justice. And this is why, evangelism is so important. This is why the gospel is so important, because the gospel shifts that. The gospel changes that mindset. It changes the worldview to be able to say, yes, people are still sinful and wicked and, human. And here's a better way.
Absolutely. And so it would sound like in order for someone to show us the better way, I think one of the problems we have is we have a lot of people who maybe we don't have a real understanding. Maybe we don't understand the other side. We don't understand the views. A lot of times we build straw man arguments. We are attacking things that people aren't actually saying, and that happens going both ways. But you are uniquely positioned. And so what you have done, and you, along with others, as you were so kind to point out at the beginning with the Center for Biblical Unity, is you've begun to offer resources and a way forward that is biblical, that is not humanistic, that is not social justice, that is biblically based. And for people like myself, we need that. As a pastor, I need that. As a believer, I need that. As a father of 2 children and a third on the way, I need that. I want to be able to be part of a solution. And I think we obviously have to understand there has been a problem. We have to understand there's a way to move forward. You talked about the LA riots here in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Where I pastor, we have a little bit of history. In fact, there's a restaurant here in town called Counter, and that particular lunch counter was the place of a sit-in that turned into jail for the Friendship 9 from here. Also, John Lewis came through with the Freedom Riders, and there's stories of beatings that happened right here in this city. And so we have our history that we look and we go, hey, we know that things are not correct. When I look around my city, I see things that stand out to me. I see disparity. I see things that I know the answer is not a non-biblical answer. And then I see division. I've seen last year at this time, we had protests in our streets over a reaction to an arrest. We had a police officer ended up being arrested. So a lot of things have gone on, and we've seen it on a smaller scale. Again, nothing like the infamous LA riots. But I'm going to walk into my church on Sunday, and I'm going to look into a sea of faces that is growing more diverse. And I will be honest, I feel my heart is to help with true reconciliation, but I feel unequipped. And I feel like people in my congregation feel the same way. I feel like no doubt there are people in my congregation that are struggling with racism. I don't doubt that at all. There are people that are of many races that are struggling with racism. There are also people that have moved beyond it, but they don't know how to help their children. And so you've created some tools. Can you tell us a little bit about the Center for Biblical Unity, what you have going on, and then if you have tools that can help us move forward?
Yes. So the Center for Biblical Unity, like I said, established in 2020, February of 2020, and we exist truly to have safe and sane conversations around race, justice, and unity. So nobody's screaming, no one's being shamed for whatever color of skin you bear, whatever your, ethnic background is. We want to have conversations that empower, that educate, and we go from there. Our first goal is that our conversations are biblical, Christ-centered, Christ-honoring. So I'm not necessarily interested in all of the cultural conversations and being educated from a cultural perspective. I want to be educated from a Christ-centered biblical perspective first. Does that mean that the cultural conversations bear no weight? No, I do need to understand what's happening in culture. So I do read first source books. I've read White Fragility, I've read Critical Race Theory, I've read like Black liberation theology books and things like that. So I want to understand what's happening in culture, but I want to do that so that I can disciple people well into saying, look, this is not the way. This is what this can look like if it shows up on your doorstep. But first and foremost, this is what the Word of God says, and this is the way that we move forward. Part of how we do that is through our curriculum, Reconciled. Reconciled is a 6-week small group curriculum, and it talks about our reconciliation as believers. So one of the things that many people in culture and in the church are talking about is this idea of racial reconciliation. I don't necessarily subscribe to that mindset or that terminology. A friend of mine, I call him Uncle Virgil Walker from the Just Thinking podcast. He wrote in one day on our live stream and he said, you know what, races don't reconcile, hearts do. And that's really just stuck with me because as believers, I'm not talking about the culture, but as believers, when we come into the kingdom, when we get into relationship with God, the word says in John 1 that he gives us the right to become children of God. When we are children of God, we are reconciled. We come into right relationship with one another. I've come into a right relationship with God, and that makes me a brother or sister to the believers who are also in the body of Christ. Now, to me, that and from my best understanding and reading of the scripture, that is a reconciliation. Now, just like I can have issues with my biological brother or sisters. Can we talk about some of those things? Can we talk about the hurts or, what has happened? Sure. But there is a specific way. If you read Ephesians 4, there's a specific way in which we treat one another, how we move forward together. That entire chapter on Ephesians 4, and actually the entire book of Ephesians, really is like a playbook or a family rule book for how we deal with one another. When I look at 2 Corinthians 5, I'm no longer holding the sins of my brother or sister against them because now they've come into the family of God. It says the old is past and the new has come. Does that mean that we don't have to have some kind of conversation sometime? No. Sure, we can talk about things like this really hurt me, or, do you know the history? Sometimes. I'm not saying that this is 100% all the time. One of the things I think America can do better at, and the church can do better at, is having a fuller understanding of history. We got some ugly history toward all people, not just Black people, all people. So having that fuller narrative, I think, is a biblical concept. As we come into the family, how we treat each other as family is important. And this is what Reconciled, our curriculum, talks about. It's about how do we, being reconciled, walk forward together in unity. As believers, this is what we are called to. Read John 17 and the Lord's Prayer for our unity. We have to understand that our unity stands for something. It means something. And so that's our curriculum. We also do a family meeting every Thursday where, either Krista or myself or both of us will hop on and we'll just do a live stream. And we don't sometimes we plan things, sometimes we don't. We just want to check in with people because we're family. What's going on with you? How can I pray for you? We do book groups. Where like I said before, we read through first source books, first source material. We'll also read, Christian material. So we'll read like Vodi Bakum or something like that. But we want people to understand what's being put out in culture so that people understand, look, this is what's being said. If you hear this wording, know that that is this ideology. We do infographics and videos and teachings. Krista has 2 theology degrees from Biola, and she teaches hermeneutics. She teaches God, life, and the Bible. We did a class last year on race and ethnicity. We're going to do another one on justice this year. So we're really wanting to educate people so that the church cannot always say, oh, I didn't see that coming. Oh, that completely caught me off guard. No. How are you being discipled into, 1, your faith, and then 2, how do you understand what's happening around you?
Absolutely. I love that. And let me want to go back and ask one question about something you just said. You guys do book groups for first source material?
So
that is super cool. I like that.
Let's see. I have some books right behind me. I want to make sure I'm actually talking in my mic. I have some books right behind me. Gosh, we've done Critical Race Theory by Gene Delgado and by Richard Delgado and Gene Stefanchich. We've done Urban Apologetics by Eric Mason. We're going to do Faithfully Different by Natasha Crane. And I'm not saying that I agree with all of these books. We've done The Third Option by Miles McPherson. We've done quite a few books. Social Justice, Why Social Justice is Not Biblical Justice by Scott Allen. We've done many, many, many books. This is our 4th or 5th round of book groups. And awesome. We generally do 3 books each round. So this time we're going to do Natasha Crane's book, Faithfully Different, which is a great resource for parents who are looking to, not just parents, youth pastors, senior pastors who are looking to raise a faithfully different generation. We're going to do James Cone, the father of Black liberation theology. Do not agree with him, but definitely think that the Black liberation theology conversation is highly impacting what we're seeing happening, like playing out in our regular culture. And then I don't remember the last book that we're going to do, but
yeah, I love that idea doing that because a lot of times I think I read a lot of first source as well, but I'm not going to just hand somebody the new Jim Crow and tell them to go read it. But having us read that together, I love that idea. So folks can follow you by going over to, you want to give us your website and social media and places they can follow you guys?
Yes. Sign up for our weekly newsletter. So every Sunday, Krista sends out a newsletter just about ministry updates and highlights that we've put out in the week. And you can find that newsletter or sign up for that at centerforbiblicalunity.com. And that is right there on our homepage, the opportunity to sign up for our newsletter. You can follow us on Facebook, Center for Biblical Unity, the same on Instagram. Come and get connected with the family and, be resourced. And then, also just hang out with the family.
Absolutely. Once again, Monique, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate your insight, sharing your journey. We're going to have you back on to do a deep dive into some of these topics, but thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
And for everyone else, I hope that today has been more than a conversation for you.
Thanks again for being part of More Than a Conversation today. If you'd like more content like this, check out my blog at www.pastorconley.com. That's PastorConley.com. Again, that's PastorConley.com. I'd also love to see you join us in worship at Garden Sanctuary. If you're ever in Rock Hill, South Carolina, or the greater Charlotte area, we'd love to have you stop by and worship with us. Check us out at www.gardensanctuary.com. That's gardensanctuary.org. Until next time, I hope this has been more than a conversation.